ask me is, so what causes chickenpox? In other words, they can't stick with the process of how do you know, how would a virologist, for instance, know there's a virus and know that it causes a disease? They immediately go to, so who are your real parents? And if you can't tell me that, then I'm going to continue to believe in nonsense. And I can tell anybody listening that once you get that clear,
Mhm.
that what you're here to do is figure out what isn't true that we've been taught, and you can stay in that unknowing place, the world will open up to you in a way that you never would have imagined. So, like I wrote a book, The Heart, about the heart.
Mhm.
The step was the heart does not pump the blood, right? Everybody thinks the heart pumps the blood.
Right.
That's what I was taught. I went to medical school. I was an ER doctor for a while. I'm not unfamiliar with, you know, with the rap, right? Everybody know we learn it in fourth grade. It's not true. It's easy to prove. And even though I, for 20 years, didn't know how the blood moved, it didn't
Ah,
matter because I
yeah.
knew that the heart wasn't pushing the blood. And then eventually it came to me. And that's the way the world works. But you have to get rid of the delusions first. Otherwise, you'll just go from one delusion to the next. And that's how most people live their lives.
Interesting. And this is part of the reason I think we find ourselves with declining health, declining lifespan in the US, for the first time in many, many years. People are not living as long as they once did, and it's not increasing. Right. So let's dive into this, Dr. Tom. The idea that the heart is not a pump. I think a lot of people, is anyone in the audience kind of going, what? What do you mean? You say in your book, and I'm going to paraphrase this, not primarily a mechanical pump. It's kind of more like a regulator, a vortex creator, or something like that. Explain a little more.
Yeah, I don't think that's quite right.
Okay.
I don't say it's not primarily. It is
Okay.
not a pump.
Oh, it's not a pump. Okay. Well, I
No,
was
it
trying
is
to
not.
be a little more conservative.
Yeah.
Not at all.
I
Okay.
There's no room here for uh pussyfooting around.
Okay. I love it.
So a lot of these things are dependent on definitions,
Hmm.
right? Because if you don't really be clear with the words and defining things, then it's easy to get sidetracked.
Okay.
So, first of all, what do we mean by a pump? Because there actually are a lot of different kinds of pumps. So, let's be clear. I mean a pressure propulsion device. What that means is if you have a cylinder or an object
Hmm.
and it's got fluid in it, like water, blood, or whatever, the reason for the movement of the water or the blood is because the walls of the cylinder contract and therefore create pressure that pushes the blood forward. That's what I mean by a pump. Now, so somebody says, well, there are other kind of pumps. That's true. But this is what I mean, and this is what conventional science and medicine means. They say the left ventricle contracts,
Hmm.
that pushes the blood around the body. That's what we all learned. Now, the first thing that was interesting about that is we have, maybe 100,000 miles of blood vessels. Most of them are very small diameter that has stuff in it that's at least the size of the internal diameter of the vessel. Those are called red blood cells. So the first thing that's interesting is if you have a 1 pound bit of muscle and you're going to push that sticky blood with stuff in it 100,000 miles, like that's a hell of a push. And so that was the first thing that got me thinking, I don't know if I buy in this.
Yeah.
The next thing was, it turns out that the blood exits through the aortic arch and goes through the arteries, and then it slows down, and it gets to the capillaries, these thin wall, these very small blood vessels, and that they connect the arteries to the veins. And in the capillaries, the blood stops, right? Because it has to offload stuff and it has to pick up waste products. So it can't be whizzing through your foot or your liver or whatever. So, so we have this movement of the blood that goes from high velocity, slower, 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 then it stops, and then it gets going again, right?
Right.
And imagine then you have a bus that you want to go from San Francisco to New York, and the bus stops in St. Louis,
Mhm.
right? Like the blood, and you don't have an engine in the bus. I'm not getting on that bus because it's going to stop in St. Louis, and anybody with any sense would put the pump where the blood stopped, not where the blood is moving the fastest, which is the heart.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the question then is, how do you pump and then have it go to zero and then get going again and have all that movement come from the pump of the and besides that, we know that the blood is moving fastest as it goes into the heart and the same speed the fastest as it exits. So why would you put a pump there?
Right.
Any farmer, if they have water that's moving fast and then it goes to a lake, like the capillaries, and then you want it to get back up the hill to the moving fast, would put the pump at the lake.
Right.
So
Right.
that made no sense. And the
Mm.
final thing, and there's even more, but when you look at the outflow tube of the heart, it's called the aortic arch, shaped like McDonald's arch, right? An arch. Now, if you think about it, when the and I used to work in a cath lab, so I would see the dye go into the heart and then come out. When you're the maximum contraction called systole, the aortic arch bends in. Now think about that. If you put a garden hose on a spigot
Right.
and it
It
was
would.
shaped like an arch and you turned it on full blast, the garden hose would straighten out, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But it doesn't, it bends in. And I asked the cardiologist, well, that doesn't make any sense because if it's pushing, it would straighten. And he said, well, that's just the way it does. And I said, I know that's the way it does because I can see it. But that makes no sense. So that told me that it cannot be pushing the blood out of the heart. It,
Ah, yes, I get it.
it's
I
got
get
to
it.
be suctioning. That's why it
Right.
bends the outflow tube in.
Right.
And there are other reasons, but those are the reasons why that model makes no sense at all.
Wow.
First of
Can
all,
I?
the blood has to start moving at the capillaries. Second of all, it can't be pushing it out if the tube goes in.
Yeah. It wouldn't make sense biologically to push something through a bend. It would be creating more stress and more,
Yeah.
work for the heart to do. It wouldn't be very effective from a biological perspective. I want
From
to
a
hear what,
hydraulics perspective.
right, right. But it would
Right.
also create more work and tension on the heart, so we wouldn't be as effective or
Right.
last as long, etc. Right? So, what do you think? I want to hear your questions and what you think of this. Now, Dr. Tom, the interesting thing is that you looked at some other things that could be going on, and you kind of opened up a whole other world. So, if that's not what's happening, then what is happening, and why is that important for us to know today?
So we first of all we know that therefore that the movement of the blood has to start when blood is stopped. Right? It has
Mm-hmm.
to. It's stopped. You got to get it going again. So the movement of the blood, i.e., the quote pump, has to be at the capillaries. In other words, in your legs, in your liver, etc.
Ah,
It has to be. And then it gets going. And then, there's a thing called Bernoulli's principle that if you take a wetland and you compress it down into a river, it goes faster and faster just because of the compression. right? Rivers move faster than lakes.
Right.
So as you start it moving and it goes through the veins and they get more and more compressed until there's the vena cava and then it goes into the heart. And what does the heart do? It stops the blood and then it makes it into a vortex,
Okay.
which interestingly, the Sufis say when the heart stops the blood, that's when God enters into the human being. So that's interesting, right? So,
Oh,
and
yeah.
God always enters through a vortex, like a sunflower seed and a snail, etc. So the blood moves into the heart, the heart converts it into a vortex, then something enters into that, and then the pressure builds up, and then there's a positive pressure in the heart and a suction, a vacuum on the other side. Imagine if you put water into a tank and the walls expanded, there would
Yes.
be a suction on the other side of the gate. That difference in pressure opens the gate, sucks the tube in, and the blood spirals out into the body. So now the next question is, what got the blood moving at the capillaries? Now that that took me a long time, 20 years to figure that out, and I got
Hmm.
some help. But here, this led to another myth that we all learned. So we all learned like third grade, or I don't know what grade, that all matter exists in three phases, right?
Hmm.
Solid, liquid, gas.
Gas. Yeah.
Copper, you get liquid copper, you get gaseous copper, and you get solid copper. So water, ice, solid, liquid, water, that's liquid, steam, that's the gas phase. And then they told me in medical school that 70% of the cell of the contents, the volume in a person is water. So I thought, okay, which phase is it in? Right? There's only three. It's not ice,
Right.
right? Not steam.
Mm-mm.
Got to be water. So I'm an ER doctor. I see people get bayoneted and stabbed and shot. You know how many people had water squirting out of their body?
I think I know the answer.
Zero.
Yeah. Yeah.
Does it feel to you like you have water sloshing around in your body?
No, I just assumed like it's mixed with body fluids, and all these lymph and all this sort of uh,
Well,
concoction
that's
of
what they tell you. It's
yeah,
liquid water.
yes,
But there is no liquid water in us. There's no liquid, there's urine, but there's no liquid water. So then you ask the question, you've heard of Jello, right? You've
right.
seen
Ah,
97% water. Which phase is it in?
ooh, it's kind of in this in to me, I
Yeah,
would
but
say
it's
an in
only
between
three
phase.
choices.
Okay, well then it doesn't fit any of them.
Right. So those three choices are wrong.
Ah,
That's the problem. It's a
yes,
big problem because all of the water, the most important substance in us, is in a gel phase. But modern science says that doesn't exist, which is a problem because that's like weird. And you can prove that the whole the consistency is a gel, and that's why if you stick a hole in Jello, right, nothing squirts out.
right.
So we now know that all of the contents in our body of water is in this gel phase. Now, here's where it gets interesting. If you take a tube made of protein that's like hydrophilic, meaning it likes water, it will take liquid water and make it into a gel. And the gel is negatively charged. So if you take a capillary, that's a hydrophilic tube, and you put water in it like blood, it
Okay.
will make a negative charged gel layer on the inside of the tube. And that means there's
Ah,
positive charges go into the liquid water in the middle, and
yes,
they repel each other and start movement.
pushes. Yes.
That is the pump. Now, here's where it gets really interesting for a lot of the people listening to what to do. Why does this matter? So, there's been experiments done. You can imagine take a beaker of water, right, like this, and you suspend a hydrophilic tube in it, right? You
Okay.
with me?
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And then you can measure the velocity of the water, which just happens by itself. And then you shine the sunlight on it, and it makes it move faster.
Oh.
And then you put the beaker of water on it on the earth, and it makes it move faster. Why? Because the earth and the sun charge the water and create that separation of charges, which is the pump, which is the origin of flow. And then you put your hands on the beaker, and it makes the water move faster. That's called laying on of hands. And then you put your dog next to it, or most dogs, and it makes it move faster. And then you put your cell phone next to the beaker, and you know what happens?
Probably slows down.
Water stops moving.
Oh, wow.
Why?
Yes.
Because the electromagnetic radiation from the cell phone, it's like a weapon in your breast if you put it in your bra or in your pocket next to your testicles, uh, inhibits the formation of the gel, which is the separation of charges, therefore no blood flow or
Mm,
less blood flow. So this becomes very practical. Like if you want more blood flow, which is more life, more vitality,
yes.
more ability to heal, you just do sunlight and earthing and human touch. And I happen to like cats more than dogs, but whatever, goats, uh, uh, gardening. And if you want to inhibit, stop your blood flow, just walk around with a cell phone all the time.
Wow. Yeah. Indoors in front of your computer, maybe under some blue light and other things. Wow.
Then you
Wow.
don't get blood flow. Then the blood can't move up the venous tree,
Hmm.
and then it can't generate expand the wall of the heart. It can't vortex because it's not moving fast. So then it tends to fall back down, right? Because there's not enough movement up. And that's called congestive heart failure.
Wow.
Now, we in medicine say that you have a disease, but you don't have a disease. You have uh, poor flow because you're not living the way a human being is meant to live, which
Yes.
is sunlight and earth and humans and animals and plants and joy and movement and dancing and all the rest, right? You guys know about that.
Yeah, this is incredible. I want to hear what people think about this. And Tom, in the heart as a vortex, and you talk about kind of a little bit of a spiritual energy there too. I've got to think that vortexing is not just helping our biology, but it's also in some ways kind of like an energy vessel, if you will, right? It's doing something, or well, I'll ask you, is it doing something to the actual blood? Is it becoming structured? Is it becoming organized in some way as it moves through that vortex of the heart?
So we live in an electromagnetic field, used to be called the ether, but the
Mm,
physicists in their wisdom got rid of the ether, and that's a whole big subject that we probably don't need to get into. Um, but that's the free energy, electromagnetic energy that is the sort of the origin of life.
yeah.
Now that you could say that life means the structuring of water because
Yes.
every living thing, every plant is made of structured water. Every animal is made of, when I say structured, that's like coherent or it's gel phase, right? There is no there is no liquid water in living things. When that happens, that's a disease. Like if you hurt your knee or have arthritis in your knee, you get a fluid collection, right?
That's true.
Swelling.
Yes. Yes.
That's
Inflammation.
liquid water.
Mm.
that's dead water. If you have, you know, snot coming out of your nose, that's because it's getting rid of excess water that can't be integrated into your essentially coherent gel. So when you lose this coherence of the water, that's what we call dying.
Hmm.
And so and that is like I said, it's an interaction of the sunlight and the electromagnetic field that we live in coming through a vortex, interacting with the water in the blood to keep it coherent, create a charge field, which you can measure, which is a toroidal field around the person. It interestingly goes about 6 feet out in a
Yes.
normal, which is why they wanted us 6 feet apart so we would stop interacting with each other. That was no accident.
Yeah.
So that's sort of how it works, just from a very clear, rational, scientific point of view. And there is no way the heart pumps the blood the way they say. And it is very important because if you realize that the flow of the blood comes from the periphery, and if I asked you, so Darius, what would you do if you had a you wanted to water 100 feet away
Hmm.
and your spigot was weak, like the flow was weak, and you only had enough money to get a new or change your garden hose? What would you do? It's very simple.
If my spigot, I'd put a smaller
You can't
hose,
fix the flow.
right?
All you can
Smaller
do is
hose.
change the hose.
Yeah, I get a smaller diameter hose so I could
Get a
have more
smaller
pressure.
diameter
Right.
hose.
Right.
And the problem is you get less volume of water,
Correct.
but you get a better flow. So if you have weak flow, your body makes the blood vessels narrower. That's called high blood pressure.
Oh,
That's
okay.
not a disease. There are no diseases, actually. That's the
Ooh,
body's strategy of you didn't fix your pump because you wore a cell phone on your pocket all day. So you decrease the
right.
energy flow, the separation of charges. So you got a weak flow and you didn't fix it. So we changed the diameter of your pipe for you. And
Wow.
then the doctors come along and then they give you drugs to increase the diameter of your pipe. And then you get like erectile dysfunction. Why?
Mm,
Because there's no flow.
there's no pressure. There's no pressure
There's
to
no
keep it
pressure.
clean.
I
Yeah.
mean, this is
Oh
not
boy.
rocket science. This is simple mechanics,
That's right. Simple hydraulics, my friends. What do
simple
y'all think?
hydraulics.
Renee says amazing. Are y'all starting to get this? I know it took a journey, but are you starting to get it? Just amazing. Gosh, our bodies are doing the best they can to help us and protect us. Absolutely. And then we may be hijacking it with all these different protocols that ignore the issue. I think what's interesting too, Dr. Tom, is that if we just think of the heart as a pump, the way that conventional medical science tells us, then we kind of just ignore a lot of the spiritual truths about the vortices and the energies, and maybe the heart as a cosmic gateway, or as a you know gateway to intelligence, to higher realms, to vibration, to love. And if what it's doing is acting as a vortex, as you described, right, this opens the door for us to really understand how all of this becomes connected rather than separate. And I love that.
Yeah, absolutely. You missed the whole thread.
Yeah.
By the way, the idea that the heart vortexes the blood, this is absolutely provable with, dynamic MRIs and even ultrasounds. You can see the blood moving in a vortex. It comes in having lost the vortex, and then it goes, that's the function of the heart. Stop the blood, twist. That's the
Okay.
way the muscles are oriented. Create a vortex,
That is true. Yeah.
create allow the electromagnetic field, you might say the God energy or what, however you want to think of that, enter the field to create. People say to me, well, I, my brain can't think about it. And I always say, how do you know your brain thinks?
Right.
You don't like, I don't know that. I just know somehow I'm saying certain things. I don't know that it's not my foot or my heart or my liver or all together or somehow separate.
Yeah.
We say things and we confuse ourselves by things we were taught that we actually have no experience of. That's the problem. You haven't had any idea what part of you thinks. At least I don't.
Yeah.
So I don't say my brain thinks. Uh, I know my brain is the highest watery organ and it's the most coherent organ. So I have a guess that it's actually the part that downloads the most information.
Yes.
But
Yes.
that's not called thinking. That's something else altogether. Anyways, my point is we make up stories for things that we don't really either don't understand or sometimes even can't understand.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
I'd rather just say I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. When you say you don't know, you open up another world of
You open up a
possibility.
lot of worlds.
Well, yeah,
Absolutely.
there's what we know, there's what we think there's what we know, there's what we know that we don't know, which is like this realm. And then there's this, of course, huge realm of what we don't know that we don't know, which is so vast, we can't even imagine. You spoke with me privately as we were kind of getting ready, for the call a few months back, and you had some very interesting ideas on heart attacks. And again, I want to say we're not offering medical advice, treatment, or guidance, but we're looking at a different paradigm. And what you had shared about heart issues was very unique to me. And we've got a few questions about heredity, heart attack, stroke, and that type of thing. What do you see as maybe the factors that may lead to someone having a heart episode from this paradigm?
So, anybody who knows me or listens to me knows I always start, or at least I always try to start, by naming the normal claim, right? In other words, again, I'm a trained medical doctor. I worked in an ER. I've seen thousands of people with chest pain, and then I wrote a book about the heart. So I had hundreds, maybe more people came to me because they had a heart attack or didn't want to have a heart attack or
Yeah.
had chest pain or whatever. So it's a very common thing. So what is the claim? The claim is we got this 1 pound organ. We've got three blood vessels called coronary arteries. All the blood to that muscle goes through those three coronary arteries. And then if something happens and you get blockages in those three vessels, then the blood can't get through. The area downstream doesn't get enough oxygen, and that causes it to under stress. Uh, it can't breathe, it can't metabolize, and then it dies. And in the
Hmm.
beginning, it has a cramp we call angina, and then it dies, right? So
Yeah.
that's the claim. Now, when I started investigating, because I don't believe anything I learned, um, so I said, what is the evidence that this claim is true? Well, the first thing, and I can ask you this, do you think that the blood in your coronary arteries, right? Blood that goes through is the same blood that goes to your spleen and the liver and your foot and your brain and your eyes and all the rest of it?
Absolutely. I would say it's the
Yeah, it's
same
the
blood.
same,
Yeah.
right? What about the artery? Is the coronary artery made of the same thing as the splenic artery, hepatic artery, carotid artery, femoral artery, the rest of it?
I don't know if I can answer. So I'm not a biologist, so I don't know that answer.
It is. Take it
It
from me.
is. Okay, I'll
We
take it
don't
from
have
you.
a special coronary artery.
Okay.
They're just arteries. They're made of,
Arteries.
muscle, and there's this protective layer and all
Right.
that.
Which is why in a bypass you can
You
take
can
artery from the
substitute.
leg and substitute it and stick it
Yeah.
in, sew it into the heart. Okay, great.
Okay. So, therefore, if there's something in the blood going through the artery that essentially precipitates and causes plaque, that would have to happen everywhere in the body because same blood, same artery,
Hmm. Yeah, that
right?
would make
So you
sense.
get
Yeah.
plaque in your splenic artery, in your hepatic, that's the liver artery, femoral artery, the rest of it, right? It's got to. Same thing. How many people do you know who've had heart attacks in your life? Like a lot, right?
Yeah.
Dick Cheney, Bill Clinton, Uncle Fred, a bunch of other people. How many people do you know had spleen attacks?
I can't say I do.
I don't either. How about liver attacks?
No, no.
Nobody. How come? You get blocked arteries to your spleen.
Yeah.
So that made me think there's something funny going on here. There's something about the heart and the
Mhm.
brain. The brain has attacks too. We call them strokes.
That's right.
The only two organs that have, quote, attacks. So the next thing is uh, I don't know how many hundreds of people come to me and say, I was walking up Mount Tam or some hike with my wife, and I got a little shortness of breath and some pain in my chest.
Hmm.
And the wife made me go to a cardiologist, and he did a test, and he said, I have a 95% blockage. And if I block anymore, and they usually wag their finger like this, then I'm going to have a heart attack and die. Right? I've heard
Right.
that 100 times.
Yep.
So I thought, okay, if what you're telling me is all the blood to your heart goes through those three major arteries, and you have one that's 95% blocked, number one, how did you walk up that hill?
Mm.
Number two, you mean if you block from 95% to 97%, that's going to kill you? If you got 5% blood flow, you have no blood flow. So that doesn't make any sense either, right? The whole thing just. So then I said, okay, I'm going to go to the medical literature and see how many people who die of a heart attack, those are the worst of the worst, actually have a blockage to the in the artery leading to that part of the heart.
Okay.
Should be 100%, right? Because that's what they
Right.
tell us. So I looked at because they did studies like that in the 40s and 50s
Hmm.
when they proposed this theory, which the cardiologists at the time didn't believe. They
Really?
said
Okay.
the people who have blockages have less heart attacks than the people who have more blockages. Uh, no, the people who have blockages have less heart attacks than the people who
Okay.
don't have blockages. And I'll tell you
Really?
why in
Okay.
a second.
Okay.
So they did studies, and some studies were 18% had a blockage, and the highest was 78%, which means that somewhere between 22% and 82% of the people who die of a heart attack have no blockage in that artery leading to the heart.
Wow. That
Which
is,
means, why did they die? 80% of
yeah,
them died from what?
something else. Yeah.
And the biggest study, guy named Giorgio Baroldi, 50 years studied, used a pathologist in Italy, dissected people who died of a heart attack. 41% of them had a blockage, which meaning
Okay.
59% didn't.
Didn't.
And then he said that of those 41%, half of the blockages came after the heart attack. He figured out how he could tell that, not before. So
Right.
that means 80% of them didn't have a blockage before they had a heart attack. Now, even the 20% who did, he said, that doesn't prove the blockage caused the heart attack. It just meant they had a blockage. 80% didn't have a blockage. And why did they die of a heart attack? So that led me to conclude the whole thing is a bunch of hooey.
Hmm.
And then you look at the studies on bypass surgery and stents and angioplasties where they bypass the blockage or roto-root it out.
Correct.
And they say the studies show no decrease in further heart attacks, no increase in longevity, and the only study that ever actually did stents, so they roto rooted out and put a thing in, And then half of the people, they told them they put a stent in, but they didn't do anything. They just put the catheter in and then pulled it out. They had exactly the same amount of chest pain 6 weeks later. So they proved that stents and bypasses don't do anything for anybody with heart disease. And
Interesting. What
so
can
that means
uh
that it's not true that the heart reason for heart attacks is blocked arteries. In fact, if you actually do a careful analysis of the blood flow, over 95% of the blood flow is from small vessels, not those three major arteries in the first place. So the whole thing is wrong. The blood flow, it's like a watershed. The body, or, like God was not so stupid to say, you got these three arteries. If one gets blocked, boom, you're dead.
yes.
That's a stupid plan. He put it like a watershed, right? So you've got all these overlapping little vessels that carry the blood. If one gets blocked, it's no big deal. In fact, if one gets blocked, it tells your body to make new ones. This is an ingenious system. But the problem is the heart itself gets sick. And what I mean by that, it's like a cramp in your leg, right?
Mm-hmm.
You exceed not the oxygen, but just your metabolic capacity. And
Mm,
then you build up acid, like lactic acid in your leg,
right.
have a cramp. And it happens in your spleen, and it happens in your leg, and it happens everywhere. Happens in your heart, we call it angina. The reason you don't have a spleen attack is then your spleen stops. And the reason you don't have a leg attack is your leg
Legs.
stops.
Yeah, your leg stops. You stop
Your
walking
heart
or
and
you
your brain can't
can't
stop.
stop.
So they
Yeah.
build up more and more acid, and
Ah.
then that causes a breakdown of the tissue called necrosis, called a heart attack, and that's what we call a heart attack.
Would that be similar to like a cramp? I'm thinking of like a leg cramp, built up
Yeah,
of lactic acid, and then you get a cramp. If you get
you
a
get a
cramp
cramp
in
in
your
your heart.
heart, you're going to feel it.
Yeah, you get a cramp in your heart,
Oh my
except your
gosh.
heart has to keep,
Yes,
vortexing, not like your leg, because you usually stop because
that's right.
it
That's
hurts.
right.
And your heart is the most energetically, metabolically active, your heart and your brain. So that's
Wow.
why they're the ones that need the most energy, use the most energy, and can't stop. And they build up acids, and then they eventually that can destroy the tissue. And this has been experimentally proven that all heart attacks start with a increased acidity in the tissue,
Oh, in the actual muscle tissue. So
in the
increases.
actual muscle tissue.
And is that
Has nothing
lactic
to do with
acid?
oxygen,
Okay.
has nothing to do with the blood flow through the arteries. And interestingly, just like a river, if you
Hmm.
have a flowing river and then somebody like a beaver builds a dam in the river, you'll get debris upriver from the dam, right?
Yeah.
The upriver debris didn't cause the blockage where the beaver built the dam. The beaver caused the blockage.
Yeah.
So the reason you see blockages in people with heart attacks is because they have a damage to their heart and then they get debris upriver from the damage.
Got it.